kids are actually encountering and needing in the 21st century. We're a nonprofit organization that has a weird connection with the technology space. We believe that technology is actually most useful when it's connecting meaningful human experiences. And we think that that is complicated, and that gets a little bit, it's hard to know how to do that. And so we also think that listening to kids in the development of what those meaningful experiences are to them is important. And that's where it gets one more step chaotic. And yet that's where you also find the beauty in those things. And I want to tell you a little story about kind of how that looks and how that can unfold when we work together to do that. A couple of years ago, a group of kids in Guatemala looked around their community, and they realized that there were kids in their community in the rural areas that didn't have access to school and books the way that they did. And that was when the idea for the mobile library bus was born. We got an old sheriff's bus. It happened to be a sheriff's bus, which is a little ironic. And then we asked a world of kids on the Wonderment platform what they thought should go in a library bus, what they cared about in their libraries, what they thought, what books we shouldn't miss, what things we should have available for those kids. And they came up with all kinds of interesting suggestions, ranging from very beautiful things like a friendship bench to snakes. And so it was really fun to hear a whole world of kids giving their perspective of what they thought was interesting and valuable. And that activated these kids in these different communities who were very far from Guatemala to start doing book drives and fundraising efforts in their own communities to participate in something that otherwise they would never have had access to think existed. And as they started to do that, we also found adults getting involved. So we brought together companies and different donors to actually do some of the things and access some of the resources that kids couldn't do themselves. And as they did that, we found something kind of fascinating in this process, that adults need this just as much as the kids do. We need to build a better world with our kids, not for our kids. And that it's actually something that benefits us at the same time. We actually had one of the people an employee at the volunteer day for the company that we worked with, start crying and saying, I'm just so happy to be outside and be making something that matters. And I think that that's something that we forget exists and is important, and we can actually partner with our kids to access that part of ourselves. And as that's a phenomenon that we see happening over and over, that's something that we all have to come together in our own immediate communities and understand how we relate to the people immediately around us before we can understand what place we have in a global community. We started out as an organization wanting to create ways that kids could feel an active part of a global community, but you can't jump to that if you don't actually know how to relate to the people that are sitting around you, if you don't know your place and your voice in your own community. This was the bus after we finished it. It was awesome. It went down to Guatemala, and actually right now we talk weekly with the group of kids that are using it to develop literacy programs for rural kids in Guatemala, and I'm blown away on a consistent basis of the stuff that they're coming up with. And they're sharing the things that they're learning on the Wonderment platform. That's why that technology is so valuable, is because it helps those kids in their work to inspire other kids. And that's where the story here in Salt Lake starts. This is actually a group of students that saw what happened in Guatemala and were inspired by it. They were doing a workshop series on how to welcome kids from refugee backgrounds into our community, since Salt Lake does get a lot of refugees. They came up with the structure and the programming for the bus that it's actually outside right now. You can go check it out after this if you want. But we've done, so far the bus has been out going to different refugee neighborhoods with programming that kids conceptualized, and also going to local community schools. This was actually a school that it went to about a month ago who had written letters, welcome letters, for refugee kids in the neighborhood, and they left it on the bus so that then when it went to one of the refugee neighborhoods, that was something that was available for them to see. So kind of what we found from this is that kids have this unique moment and window in time when they want to do all of these things, but it's increasingly challenging to know how to give them access to that world when it's not, they don't have money, they don't have unsupervised time, they don't have these things that typically would allow you to do meaningful community impact work. And that's what we're here as an organization to help adults and kids come together in ways that actually lets them feel like they initiate this. This is actually a group of kids in Kenya that's one of our most recent communities that has come online, and they are seeing this work that's been happening here in Salt Lake and getting inspired for a project that they're doing in their own community, which is actually a slum, one of the biggest slums in Africa. So it's kind of interesting when you see, when we can become adults that know how to facilitate this type of exchange, when we have the technology tools and the willingness to work together to do it, and when it's something that can take on a bigger momentum than just any individual efforts. We can actually share those efforts with the world. there's a really powerful connection that is made in kids' minds, and we really believe in that. So thank you.